There's three things I would like to mention before we actually start the parsha. Number one, we'd like to thank our sponsors for today's shir. It's sponsored by Claire and Marie Shore and Liz and Josh Gordon. It's to commemorate the yard site of Claire and Liz's mother, Yuta Bas Yishaya Halevi. When's the actual yard site?
Tomorrow night.
Tomorrow. It's in the Shem Shavan Aliyah, so we do thank you indeed. And the Shem Shavan Aliyah from the Divrei Torah. That's number one. Number two, welcome back. We had a little bit of a short break, so we welcome everyone back. At the end of January, there's something what they call Yeshiva Week, and that is when the kids and Eitz Chaim and Darche are out of school, and we become, even though it's a parsha that it's a time when we talk about freedom from slavery, when the kids are out of school, it changes things back. But so therefore, that Monday, which is the last Monday in January, there will not be a class due to the fact that we're going to be taking care of the two younger ones, God willing. So we're going to be waiting. And next, I'm drinking an espresso. So it's good. I'm thankful. In the future, tone it down a little bit with these kind of with gifts. It's a little bit too much for a simple guy like me. But it's very enjoyable. And it's at home now. And the kids are loving it. The idea that within a few seconds, you just press a button and you have it's an unbelievable toy and pleasure. That's what we have. There are three parshiot. We have Shmot, Vaeira, and Bo. We're not going to do all three today because we have Bo for next week and Shmot passed last week. But nevertheless, you're going to turn to page 318. And you will realize that these three sections are the ones that start off with exile and lead us to the Exodus, to Yetziat Mitzrayim. And each one of them is trying to achieve a different message. Shmot, Vaeira, Bo. While Parashat Shmot is really introducing us to the players who will be the active leaders, and I say leaders in the plural because it is important to remember that in Judaism we have different personalities. And a mature approach to Judaism is to actually appreciate the fact that people are different. Right? In other words, if you think differently, if things that inspire you are different than what inspires me, it is something that we celebrate, we appreciate, right? When you are younger and a little less mature, you have difficulty in accepting anyone that does not fit the precise mold, right? If that came out of the factory, right? You purchase cookies from large bakeries. They're all going to be coming out the exact same shape. When they're going to be packaging them, if indeed there is a cookie that is larger or looks a little bit different, is going to be rejected and not going to be placed in the package. So if you are into mass production, the cookie that looks different is not going to be having a role. Judaism believes that the fact that there are differences in what inspires me and the way I think from what inspires you must be celebrated because each one of us has a unique role to play. And that is why when we come to Moshe and Aaron, it is very important to realize the difference between them, and they are the ones that are introduced in Parashat Shmot, and they are the ones that play that role in leading us out of Egypt. The roles are different because Aaron is the people person. He is a people person. Those many years, it's fascinating how Moshe Rabbeinu, if you take the rabbinic approach, that he leaves Egypt at age 12 and returns at age 80. In other words, when the average Jew is thinking of retirement and going to somewhere warmer, Egypt was a warm place, but he starts his role of a lifetime at age 80. So we have a 68-year period that he is away. Who is taking care of the people of Israel? Because even when they are enslaved, there are emotional needs, There are actually spiritual needs. They still believe in prayer. They still believe in knowledge about traditions that date back to their great-grandparents, the patriarchs and the matriarchs. Who played that role? Aaron HaKohen. And there is even, in Yechezkel, there is a section that describes communication that was given from God to Aaron while they are still in Egypt, indicating that he actually plays that significant role as the leader of the people in Mitzrayim. He is a people person. He is not there giving them laws. He is not there demanding from them. I hope everyone's okay. He is not there. I need to turn on the phone now. He is not. It was a sign that says, "Don't turn on the phone. No phone." So he is not there giving them guidance and burdening them with their spiritual responsibility. He is taking care of the needs of the people. That's Aharon. Ohev Shalom Rodef Shalom, right? Ohev et Abriot, loves people, Mekarvan la Torah. That's Aaron HaKohen. Moshe, on the other hand, is going to be the symbol of justice. The individual that is perhaps less interested in interacting with others, but is interested in the truth, and sensing that as humans, we have that responsibility of tuning ourselves into that truth. So he is a man of what we call in our tradition of din, justice. So we have din and chesed, because there is no greater chesed than being like an Aaron HaKohen, when you actually love people, and you are actually concerned about people, and people sense that you actually care about them. I think we all know as humans that we have a need for it. We have a need for it. The knowledge of the need for it is important for us to recognize that at times we play the role of giving that comfort to others and showing the concern to others. And at times we have to recognize that we ourselves need such a person, through times of challenge. Aaron HaKohen is the man of chesed. Moshe Rabbeinu is the man of din. They are very, very different. So in a world where things don't function well, they should fight, right? They should get angry at one another. You're focused too much on people. Well, you're focused too much on justice. You're focused too much on the letter of the law. You're shoving the Mishnah Berurah into people's noses, right? That would be in an unfortunate world. But they were the perfect match. They were the perfect couple. Because when they met, the Torah tells us, when Aaron HaKohen, and think about it, he is the leader, he's the older brother, he meets his younger brother, and he knows very well that this younger brother is going to be taking over the role of leadership. He's going to be a partner, but he's not going to be the leading partner. How does Aaron HaKohen act? V'racha v'samach belibo. He's happy. He's satisfied. So this is an incredible partnership, right? When you have a Moshe and an Aharon, right, and that can have such a relationship, this is what leads to Exodus. And these are the individuals that play the role. It's no coincidence that the man of justice, Moshe, spent those years, the man of din, spent those years in Midian. Okay, Midian relates to the word din as well. No coincidence there as well. So that's what's really happening in Parashat Shemot. We are introduced to the concept of the individuals that are going to play the role of Exodus. Now, next week's portion, Parashat Bo, is going to be the actual description of the actual Exodus. And even the plagues describe the 3 plagues that are going to be mentioned in Parashat Bo. All of them relate to darkness, and darkness is the symbol of exile, because as we know, exile is not just a physical exile, but a spiritual exile. And when we talk about redemption, we talk about me'afela le'ora, from darkness to light. So these are plagues of darkness to give you the picture, or for the purpose of expressing the contrast that appears at the end of the portion, that the people of Israel leave the darkness into light. That's what's occurring in next week's portion. So what is happening over here in Parshas Vaeira, and specifically in the beginning, it is the actual description of what the redemption is about. What is Jewish redemption? So yes, there are going to be 7 plagues mentioned, and they have a purpose, but to really understand the idea of the Jewish Exodus, you have to turn to the first verses, it's really a series of perhaps 12, 13 verses in the beginning of Parshas Vaeira, and it will give you clarity about what the Exodus is about. So that is what we are going to be focusing on today on page 318. Now, we could break up what we are going to be discussing into number one. Number one is the idea of God's name, because the portion itself is going to be telling us that Moshe Rabbeinu is informed. You should know, God says to Moshe, you should know that the name I used to appear to the patriarchs is very different than the name I'm going to be using now. Now, what is that all about? Right? Using different names. People in the workplace have one name, and then in the synagogue we're called up with an aliyah at a different name. It's not that. There's obviously something more there. But that is section number one that's going to be addressed. The names of God, and what's the significance of God telling them new name will be used. Now, number two, we're going to be addressing what the essence of Exodus is about. What is freedom? What is freedom? And then as well, and the third area we're going to try to clarify is the word, and this will be the word of the day. If you remember, you don't remember Sesame Street, but I grew up on it. So you remember others watching Sesame Street. Okay? By me, we're talking about my Rabbeim, right? My first Mechanchim were Ernie and Bert and Grover. So this is very, very different. That I grew up, and I mentioned this, that you have that window, because when people who are younger than me, a decade or two younger, for them already there was much more, right? In the Dora and Explorer, they have the whole series of different mechanisms. When I grew up, I was in North America, in the early 70s. This was it. That was Sesame Street was really everything. So now the word of the day is going to be Sivlotam. Samach Bet Lamed, Saval, Samach Bet Lamed. That is going to be the word we're going to try to really appreciate and understand, and that's going to be the third goal as we try to visit this week's portion. So here we go. Page 318, Vaydaber Elokim el Moshe. So God spoke to Moshe. Vayomer alav ani Hashem. You should know, I am Hashem. This is my name. But the fact that I am appearing to you and I'm going to be communicating with you with this name is something new. Because when I appeared, Vaeira el Avraham, el Yitzchak, vel Yaakov, when I appeared to the patriarchs, I used a different name. It was Kel Shakai. I'm not uttering it the way it spells, because it is one of the names of God. But that is how I appeared to them. The letters Shin, and the letter Dalet, and the letter Yud. But the name of Hashem, Yud-Kei, Vav-Kei, that was not what I used to make myself known to them. Lo nodati lahem. So that's number one. Now what is that about? What's the difference? So obviously, the name of God is not His essence. We cannot relate to His essence. We can relate to God based on what we sense. God Himself can appear one way to humanity, and He could appear in other ways. Based on how God appears to humanity or to the Jewish people, that is what the name is about. So the name is not the essence, but how He interacts. Okay? So you have a father who walks in, and he's in a bad mood after an overwhelming day at work, right? So the kids, hopefully don't say it, but when they look at him, they see and they think of the word grumpy, right? That's what they're thinking. They don't, hopefully, maybe today already they say it, but the word, but in the past they would only think it. So they think, here comes grumpy. It's not his name, it's not on his ID, but rather he is acting like a grump because he had an overwhelming day. If on the other hand, dad is on vacation and he's away from everything and he's in a good mood, right? So they look at him and they see and they think of happy dad, or right? That's what they are thinking. Okay, so the name itself does not tell us his actual name, but the way he is interacting with the children. And so too, when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God Himself, we are believers, and it is fundamental for us to believe that God, who created this world, balanced creation. What we mean by that is that when you look at the world as it is very possible to live in a world where you do not sense God. There are people who do not believe in a creator, we call them atheists, right? It's difficult to exactly use the term atheist because an atheist knows for a fact that there is no creator. How can you know for a fact? Philosophy aside, God Himself creates a world and it functions, right? And you could have scientists telling you how things develop and why things occur, and they have all kind of explanations that are given. If they are wise scientists, they are in awe in how the world operates. And therefore, you could have a person living a life not recognizing God in this world. At the same time, if you open your eyes, you realize that there's such wisdom in nature, it is absurd not to believe that there is a master creator who has a master plan, right? That's why in our tradition, the study of science is considered a holy thing. When you study science with a desire to figure out the wisdom in nature, to realize that there's a wise creator and there's so much chachma, so much wisdom in the world that exists. And you could study any species, right? You could study, there was a Rabbi, the Malbim, one of the great commentators of the late 19th century, who talked about the beavers and how what they are able to build. And he was in awe of the beaver. Why does again, for young people, they have to clarify, it's not the singer, right? If he was in awe of what the beaver was able to go ahead and build. Why was he studying it? Well, that is part of Torah as well. And there is a mitzvah. There is a mitzvah to study science when you walk in with an agenda to figure out the wisdom of the Creator, right? But there's a balance there, how you could have people of faith, because the fact is you could find God in nature, but then at the same time, God did conceal Himself enough that we have to make a decision. So now, the way it is explained, when the world was created, there was an entity known as HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if you would be in existence during creation, you would sense Him. There was no question about it. Just as you sense right now that there's light in this room, you would sense that there is a creator. God decides to create a world where He is concealed, right? The word olam relates to the word he'elem, something that is concealed. God is concealed. But God doesn't want to conceal Himself too much. So as the world is being created, it is as if God says to the world, enough, meaning don't conceal me too much. Conceal me just enough for the beings who are going to be created to make the decision to accept my existence and live a life of value and of appreciation and to recognize me, and then you are righteous. You are righteous when you are living in this balanced world where you make a decision to recognize God, to appreciate Him, to live a life of appreciation, to value the world, to value existence. So Kadosh Baruch Hu says to the world, as it is being created, and as it is concealing His essence, Amar le'olamo dai. She'amar le'olamo, meaning, world as I'm creating it, it is concealing me. Don't conceal me too much. Stop there. Dai. Dai is stop. She'amar le'olamo dos. So this is how the rabbis explain the word, the name, Shin Daled Yud. God says to the world, don't conceal me completely. Okay? Now, that is the world that the patriarchs and the matriarchs live in, where they're in a world like anyone else, and they sense something. They sense that there is a creator. Avraham Avinu sees what everyone else sees. He sees the sun rise, and he sees it set. He understands nature, and he realizes that there's something incredible here. There is something incredible here. You travel the world. There are things that inspire you, right? Some people are inspired by a frozen Niagara Falls, and they go ahead and they see it, right? So many people went for their beauty, but there are those that see, you know what, Marabu Masecha Hashem. There's actually a blessing that is said when you see a very powerful river, and the Niagara is actually included, unless the state of New York is dumping some kind of toxins, and then you can't make a bracha there because of the smell, right? That's what's, if you remember the history of Love Canal, if any of you remember of contamination that existed in that area itself. That is the world Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Avot and Imaot lived in a world that was a world that everyone else saw. But they saw through it. They saw, you know what, there must be a creator. Things are just incredible, right? And you have, there is so much beauty. You come, we're looking forward, all of us, to the spring, right? Unless some of you are traveling to warmer places, so you're looking forward to your trip. You're looking forward to the spring. And you see, the blooming of the cherry trees, right? So there's something incredible that is happening. You go ahead and realize that there is beauty there and God wants us to appreciate it. There is a blessing for it. That is you relating to God as Elohim, who is Shakai, Shin Daled Yud. That's Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Now, there's a different God. There is a different way of him relating to the world. And that is where he turns everything upside down, where the laws of nature actually change. When does that occur? Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus, Kriyas Yamsuf, the Makot, the plagues. So God is informing Moshe Rabbeinu that you should know. I interacted with the patriarchs. I did. That worked with the name Shakai, but now it's time to show that I am in complete control. Because even though I created this world where I conceal my identity, I want to go ahead and transmit to them values. And the way I'm going to transmit to them is through an appearance at Sinai. And the appearance at Sinai is going to be the result of the Exodus. Something new is going to occur here. And this is what they are being informed. It is a new type of short-term appearance of God. Now, the goal of the short-term appearance is not just that it should happen once and humanity forgets about it, but rather we should remember it from generation to generation. And therefore we have that responsibility of remembering the Exodus every single day. We have the obligation, and especially one night a year, to be sure to transmit it to the next generation, because we want to have that chain back to this incredible event. So God is informing him that, guess what? Massive event is going to occur. It is very, very significant. And obviously be sure that this benefits not just this generation, but all generations as well. And be sure that you have something called the Seder night. Seder night, the root of the Seder night, is obviously going to be appearing in this section as well. Okay, so this is what we have. This piece of information, number one, that is very important to understand this portion. Okay, verse 4. We have verse 4. Verse 4, God says, listen, there is something called the covenant I made with these righteous patriarchs. V'gam hakimoti, so it is time for me to establish the covenant that I made with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov to give them the land of Canaan, the land where they lived. Right? I promised it to them. So now God has to go ahead and do something to fulfill the promise. Now Israel is a unique land. Israel is a land that to function there, you have to follow very specific guidelines. You have to be righteous. You're not righteous, it is like a sensitive stomach. Some people have sensitive stomachs, others don't. Right? There's some people that can eat everything that's on this table and will have a normal day. There are others that if they did not have their oatmeal for breakfast, and they have some white flour and sugar and milk for breakfast, also known as like a cheese Danish, right? That's basically all it is. What? They will be suffering for the rest of the day, right? So, one of my brothers, my brother Avidan, would always laugh at me because I have the more sensitive stomach, and he could eat a whole few slices of pizza and have no problem at all. And he would laugh at me, right? And so Baruch Hashem, there's such a thing called the God that eventually he got a little bit older, right? Today's his birthday, actually, so it's a good time to mention it. And he eventually said, you know what? My stomach is not what it used to be, right? So there are sensitive stomachs, and then there are those that could, teenagers, for example, right? So now, Eretz Yisrael is a sensitive stomach. You have the right type of philosophy and practice and ethics and decency, the land will not just tolerate you, the land's going to do incredible things. Incredible things. If on the other hand you are not ethical, you're not sensitive, right? You don't value, you're not a decent human being, which is number one, and you're not a good Jew, the land itself is not going to be settled. It's not. It will go ahead and shoot you out of there. So now, even though there was a promise to give the Jewish people the land, even though there was a covenant, obviously they have to learn first how to be citizens of that land and how to be there in a way that you remain. So that's going to occur as well, because you have to remember, the Yetziat Mitzrayim does not end there. It ends with us accepting Torah and values. So for God to fulfill His promise of giving Eretz Yisrael to the descendants of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they have to first learn some values and ethics and a system to live by. And this is an introduction to what we're going to see next. That was verse 4. Verse 5. And you should know, in addition, and this is a very important message as well, God says, Ani Shamati, I have heard, right, the cries of the Bnei Israel, because after all, the Egyptians were enslaving them. Asher Mitzrayim avidim otam, vayzkor et briti, I remembered my covenant. Gam ani shamati, I heard their prayers, I heard their cries. Now, when we talk about freedom, the Seder night was celebrated in the White House under Obama. You know that. You've seen pictures of it. I don't know if he's the first. I don't know if George W. Bush did it as well. I'm not exactly sure. But there is something about the Seder night that all of humanity relate to. For example, Disney, not just the movie of the Ten Commandments, but there was an animated movie of the Exodus 10, 20 years ago. And that animated movie was very popular. It's an incredible story. People who are mistreated, people who are enslaved, are granted freedom by these awesome special effects. Is that what happened? Isn't that all what Hollywood needs? Now, the movie itself that was made, I think it was called The Prince of Egypt, ended, where did it end? After Kriyas Yamsuf. In other words, it did not end with the receiving of the Torah, because they were free, right? The nation itself is free. For us Jews, freedom on its own can be very, very dangerous. To just be free, right? Have you heard horror stories of people that grew up with all the money in the world and all the time in the world, and they could do whatever they desire at a young age, right? And what happens to such people, right? With freedom, you really could do whatever you want. If freedom is handed with no guidance, it could destroy a person and could destroy families. This is something that is a reality. Judaism focuses very much. Do not allow the Exodus, Yetziat Mitzrayim, to stand on its own. It is not about freedom. It's not what Pesach is about. It is about a freedom that will lead you to the revelation and teach you what to do with that freedom. Right? And how to live a life of value and to have an impact on the world, right? That is what Judaism is all about. So it's not so much celebrating Exodus, it is celebrating actually faith. Because that's what happens. You recognize that God took you out. Now you are committed to live a life of His values. What are His values? Go study Torah. Now, with that is indeed a message that humanity could benefit from. I'll share with you something interesting. That Ramosha Feinstein was asked a question about prayers in public schools in the United States. Right? There was a big to-do in the 70s about prayers in public schools, perhaps even earlier. And he was asked for an opinion that there was a prayer. We'll call it a generic prayer, where it made no reference to anyone specific. And the question was, what do the many Jewish kids do when this is occurring? And Ramosha Feinstein shares that you should know that although we are always told that there are 7 Noahite laws, the fact is that prayer is an obligation for all human beings. Now, it does not mean that we're going to have to start advertising that our minyan, right, will include members of all nations, because their obligation is not an obligation like we have to pray 3 times a day. Their obligation is that when they're in a situation of need, health, financial need, they should recognize, or their obligation is to recognize that there is a higher being, and they should turn to him for assistance. Okay? This is what he writes. It relates to humanity, that there is a higher being, and if you turn to him, he is with you. Right? So when you go ahead and you see, sometimes in the United States after football games, right? Teams, they have a prayer that occurs together. They hold hands and they pray. There's something very Jewish there. Now, they could damage it by throwing in a specific individual. And in many, many cases, they have him in mind. Okay, so that's unfortunate. But when it's kept in a generic form, it's magnificent. Yes, God assists us. There's prayers. I had when we lived in Memphis, so there was a council member of City Hall of our area, a fellow by the name of Jim Strickland, and I got to know him, and he asked me to come lead the prayer in City Hall before one of their meetings to discuss most probably sewage, whatever else they discuss in the City Hall. So I came, and Jim Strickland was a very fine guy. It's funny that when I met him the first time, I said to myself, that a fellow, he's capable, but he's a white guy. He's a big white guy. And in Memphis, usually, due to the fact that most of the population is of different racial background, he's maximized his political career. Now, a few years ago, I'm reading the news, who was elected mayor of Memphis? Jim Strickland, which is interesting. So Jim Strickland invites me. I come to City Hall. He's very excited to see me. He hands me a certificate with my name that I led prayer and on what is the specific day. And I'm standing there. I don't remember the prayer, what it was exactly, and there were people behind me, and they're all standing there. And then I'm sent a picture. I sent a picture of what it was. This is actually not just a digital one, an actual picture. And it was interesting to see me standing there, and behind me, in the congregation, quotes, City Hall, was a whole group of African American, most of them women. And I'm leading the prayer. And I sent it to my mother, and she enjoyed the picture of my new stellar, right? My new position. And I'm leading a congregation. But their intensity in the prayer, right? You don't make jokes with that. This is an intense moment for them. This was their tefillah. This is something that is quite magnificent. It relates to humanity to recognize that there's a higher being and turn to him. Turn to him for assistance. This is a message that could relate to all human beings. However, for us Jews, there is something that our prayer must have to be successful. There's something unique to us. And that is, our prayers are successful prayers only when we walk in together with everyone else. Right? The idea of the quote-unquote, the minyan. But much more than that. If you look at the language of our prayers, we are never just asking for ourselves. Right? Refa'enu, b'toch shar cholei Yisrael, barech aleinu. Right? Talmata al pnei kol. We're asking for our people. In other words, our prayers are not successful and are not going to have the proper impact if we only walk in on our own. We have to have the Bnei Israel in mind. It's a must. That's how we pray. There are those who need a refuah, 100% there are those who need a refuah. B'toch shar cholei Ama Yisrael. That's how we turn. And this is going to be spelled out right here. That prayer, right? Why did the Jews leave Egypt? Yes, there was a covenant, right? And yes, they're supposed to be given the land of Israel. And yes, that there was a promise that was made to the patriarchs. But you are being told here that the way the people of Israel actually achieved it is through prayer, and through prayer that had Bnei Israel together. So read carefully in the verse. Then in verse 5, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Ani shamati et nakat Bnei Israel. It has to be not the individual, but asking for everyone. Concern for community. Community is fundamental for us. At times we dream, right? Sometimes some of us dream of just being in an island, right? Away, just to meditate and to just relate to nature and God and just separate up. But that's not the Jewish way of living. Jewish way of living is being on a committee and being on a board and pulling out your hair. That is the Jewish existence. That you have to go ahead and drive yourself up, but realize this is the mitzvah of being involved in Tzarkei Tzibur, because this is what we are all about. We're this unit. Not always easy dealing with this unit, but it is something we are obligated to do. Now, so therefore we are told in verse 6, and here we go. And I say here we go because the Seder night is the night of what the rabbis call the Daled Lashonot Shel Geula, the four words that describe the journey of the Exodus. 4 words that are going to describe them. And these are the 4 stages of redemption. And we have as a result 4 cups of wine, right? To be grateful for that journey. And those 4 words appear right here. And they are, Lachen emor livnei Yisrael, tell the people of Israel, Ani Hashem, I am God. V'hotzeti eschem, I'm going to go ahead and take you out from mitachat, from the sivlot Mitzrayim, the burdens of Egypt. Okay. Number 2 is Vehitzalti etchem avodatam, I'm going to go ahead and rescue you from the service. Number 3, the 3rd stage of redemption is Ga'alti etchem, I'm going to go ahead and redeem you with an outstretched arm and with tremendous judgment. Bizra netoya v'shfatim gdolim. Or in the next verse, verse 7, which is the 4th way or the 4th stage of redemption, is Velakachti etchem li la'am, I shall go ahead and take you for me as a people, and I'm going to be your God. And as a result of that, at the end of verse 7, after those 4 things are going to occur, V'ida'atem, you should know, you will know then, Ki ani Hashem Elokechem, that I am Hashem your God, who what? Hamotzi etchem mitachat, from under the, again, Sivlot Mitzrayim. Like bookends. Sivlot Mitzrayim is the beginning, right? Being taken out from under the burden is the first, but after all 4 are presented, we are told that's the bottom line. That's the bottom line. Now, if indeed you have those 4 stages and you are successful with them, guess what you will merit? Meaning we are free after those 4 stages. We are a free nation even before we arrive in the land of Israel. However, if you take those 4 messages and make them part of your life, then you will merit, in verse 8, to make your way into Eretz Yisrael. Then I'm going to go ahead and bring you to the land which I promised to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Then you'll get it. Okay? So this is what we have. But now we have to clarify, if indeed, as bookmarks, we have this Sivlotam, what exactly is this Sivlotam? So, in modern Hebrew, if you don't see them quite often, but some of you remember from the olden days, a person who would transport heavy loads on their back. A porter. A sabal is a porter. Right? Some of you probably remember ice for your ice boxes, right?
Yeah. Not for sure.
No, you've heard of. Did any of you remember have you seen an ice box?
Yes.
We had an ice box.
Oh, wow. You had an ice box?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had.
Well, yeah, nice one. Murray, you had an ice box?
Yeah, we had an ice box. But when I used to work in a summer camp, and they have a big refrigerator, so I used to go to Georgian Bay, or
Yeah.
in the winter they cut big blocks out of the ice and they stored them over the summertime.
They still.
And in England we lived in one.
So the sabal is the person who is carrying, the porter is carrying the burden, and obviously it is the perfect image of slavery. And if you've seen any drawings from the period of the enslavement in Egypt, that is the image that we have. However, when we talk about a physical enslavement, there's also something spiritual Right? There's actually what we'll call a mindset that the Jews have to leave. And what do I mean by that? So my father, and I once gave an extended class on it, would note that these 4 words that describe the Exodus are 4 stages. And stage number 1 is we relate to it with the Kiddush on the Seder night. Stage number 2 is we relate to it with the second cup, which we hold and eventually drink during the Haggadah itself. Stage number 3 of the Exodus, the Ga'alti, where you are redeemed, is the cup of Birkat Hamazon. Stage number 4 is the cup of Hallel. And if we work, we'll start with cup number 2 because the main point will relate to cup number 1. Cup number 2 is the cup where God, He saved us. How did He save us? Through the plagues. When, during the Seder night, do we describe them? During the lengthy Haggadah. Okay, so that is the cup of the Hitzalti. That was cup number 2. Cup number 3 is Ga'alti, Ge'ula. When did the Ge'ula occur? With the crossing of the Red Sea. What occurred then? What significant role did that event represent? The idea of the Jew recognizing that it wasn't Pharaoh who controlled the world. In other words, the average Jew, after they physically left Egypt, if they would be interviewed and asked, why have you left Egypt? And they will say, thank Pharaoh. How do I know it? Because the Torah tells us, Vayi b'shalach paro et ha'am. They still give credit to Pharaoh. And if you grow up in a culture that the leader is everything, the way they are describing North Korea, right? Who actually, Kim Jong-un is celebrating his birthday today because every year we joke at our brother that they share. Everything is the leader. You wake up in the morning, there's a portrait of the leader. You walk into the supermarket that has perhaps 2 or 3 items, but what there will be is a portrait of the leader. Everything is given to you by the leader, right? So now, in Mitzrayim, if you have a child from a very young age, you could train kids to believe in anything, right? And when the radio lead on December 25th is playing a role in describing where Santa is, like, you tell me, is there any benefit in a kid knowing, right, that at some point that they fooled me? I'm trying to still figure it out, right? Like, what is the idea? So you're going to say, yeah, we do it with Eliyahu Hanavi. You're going to say the same. Well, it's very, hopefully we use that to train them, that, to tell them it's not that he's actually walking in, but it symbolizes the concept of redemption, and Eliyahu Hanavi is going to inform us of the redemption. Hopefully we don't make Eliyahu Hanavi into Santa Claus. That's what we're hoping. But a kid, right, could believe, and if you are raised with specific values and a way of thinking, you cannot shake it off by just some incredible events that occur. The Jews still sense, the average Jew believed, Pharaoh is the one that's running the show. All that was part of their psyche until they are there by Yam Suf. And they see the power of the Egyptians going underwater. Sus ve'rochuvah, the chariots, the symbol of the superpower, going down. That is when they could declare, Vayaminu b'Hashem uve'Moshe avdo. Something changes there at Kriyas Yam Suf. So that is a ge'ula, that's a redemption. Now we need our own redemptions, because often people think that their sustenance comes from their boss, right? When do we realize that everything's from Hashem? When we make the declaration of Birkat Hamazon. So therefore, the ge'ula, the third cup, is the cup of the Birkat Hamazon. Eventually, the Seder ends with Hallel, where we are grateful to God Almighty that He took us as a nation and gave us the Torah. That is the fourth cup of Velakachti. Okay, so we understand 2, 3, and 4. Obviously, we could expand, perhaps as we get closer to Pesach, we can review it. What is cup number 1? In other words, if stage number 2 is Hitzalti, if stage number 2 is that God Himself will rescue us, so what is the Vehotzeti? What is the Vehotzeti? I will take you out. What is the first stage of redemption? So the first stage of redemption is for the Jew to realize that they don't belong there. They are not Egyptians. You are not an Egyptian. You are different. The average Jew saw himself as part of Egyptian culture. They were Egyptians, perhaps second-class citizens, but that was their identity. And by the way, the greatest burden a person could carry is a false identity. Right? If you ever, sometimes, in movies, you have a situation where you have a person that is supposed to play someone else, but usually they're caught on a detail, right? Because when you ask me about myself, and you ask me about my history, so I could remember very well. I know I was in Toronto, I was in Mexico, and it's very lengthy, but time is running out, so I'm not giving you the whole list of places that I was transported from place to place. But it is easy to give those details, and if you ask me in 2 weeks from now, I could repeat those precise details because I'm sharing with you facts. If, on the other hand, I'm supposed to play, right? I'm a spy for the Mossad, or you, for whatever reason, want to go ahead and steal someone else's identity, and you're supposed to memorize, that is a tremendous challenge. To be someone else is a constant burden. You're carrying on yourself this incredible burden. And people sometimes don't know who they are, or their identity is something external. And it is not easy to live in that way. They just had on the radio, that last night they had the Oscar, the Golden Globes, which are some kind of awards for either TV or movies. Now, imagine, the actress who gets roles because of her looks. That's a fact, right? And that's what's happening. Now imagine, usually, not anyone I know, but there are people that as they get a little bit older, they perhaps don't look the same as they did when they were 21, right? Theoretically, right? Now, we as mature beings, right, and we face it as well. In other words, when I start noticing the first white hairs, I was like, that's incredible. Like, what on earth is a young guy? What are they doing there? Like, I'm sure it's a temporary issue that eventually, due to the weather or something, eventually it will turn back to the proper color of being black. And then a few months later you realize that other hairs looked at that white hair and said, yeah, that's a good color. And they join in, right? And you're not sure, what does that mean? Like, what's going on here? That's so wrong. That's not what I'm supposed to look like, right? So we deal with it, but we have an identity that we just adjust to those realities. But if my whole identity is the looks, right? So what do? So there are all kind of surgeries, and there are all kind of interesting things that you put money that in Los Angeles, probably it's a booming industry to make people look young. And in the malls, there's a store called Forever 21, which really symbolizes this idea that this is this ideal, because you don't know who you are, you want to be young, you want to have fun, you want to enjoy life. Being young forever, that is the ideal. That's a tremendous burden. If on the other hand you accept that we are here to have an impact on the world and to transmit values to a next generation, we accept ourselves and we accept existence much better when we don't carry that burden of the false identity. And that is what Torah is about. We know who we are. And I see it, that people that have values of Torah are happier because they know who they are. Right? That is what the Exodus is about. To get rid of the sivlot, the sevel of not knowing their identity. And then eventually, with the giving of the Torah, what's going to happen? They will be removed from the burden of Egypt. Now, when you make Kiddush, especially on a Chag, you are making a declaration that we are different than all other nations. Step number one of leaving Egypt is for the Jew to realize that they are different. They are chosen. We have a different role. Step number one, the first step of leaving Egypt is a mental exercise. It is to realize we don't belong here. This is not my identity. So therefore, when we are told, Lachen emor livnei Yisrael, vehotzeti etchem, I'm going to go ahead and take you out of the burden of Egypt, this is not physical. This is not the ending of enslavement. No. All it is that you're going to recognize that you are different. And as soon as you realize who you actually are, you're going to be removing this burden of the false identity. The sevel, the load of playing someone else, that's going to come to an end. And that is the journey that starts with the Exodus and it ends with Kabbalat HaTorah, when we finally know, you know what, these are my values, this is what I'm going to live by, and that's how I'm going to appreciate life. This is the journey, so this is what Parashat Vaeira is about. And Be'ezrat Hashem, next week we'll have the opportunity to continue to see how it actually occurs. Thank you for coming back, and everyone have a wonderful day. Neshama Shabbat Aliyah.